2020 has been a year of the unknowns. Tonight we focus on how the usual year-end festivities have been affected by COVID-19. The tourism, entertainment and travel sectors have been hit the hardest. The virus brought with it many changes and prohibitions to how business is conducted. And following health protocols while creating festive cheers has been a tough call. It's even a tougher time for those who suffer from mental illness, as according to mental health experts, they usually feel isolated at the time of this year. Good evening, I'm Aldrin St. Pierre, and this is Unfiltered. Our guest this evening will be joined a bit later on by Sisan Jona, who's the Chief Executive Officer at SA Tourism. We'll also be joined by clinical psychologist Siwem Tembu, as well as Professor Mariki Venter, who is the head of Zoonotic Abo at Respiratory and Virus Research Program at the University of Pretoria. And remember that you can be part of this discussion going through our social media platforms using the hashtag SABC Unfiltered. And let's start off the conversation by introducing Siwem Tembu. Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered. Let's start off here. Obviously, the festive season comes with very festive cheers. However, though, this time around, it has been dampened. Hi, Siwem, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, you cut off there for a moment.
Sure. I just wanted you to touch on how ordinarily a festive season would be all about the cheers and the festivities. However, though, this time around, it has been dampened by COVID-19.
Well, I'd first of all like to start off the ones that have actually lost family members due to COVID. So they're obviously still in a time of grieving, still in a time of dealing with loss. And usually, this time of year is when the family gets together and, celebrates family and seeing relatives you haven't seen in a long time. But for some, it's going to be a difficult festive season, knowing that they've actually lost some people due to COVID. And then there's the added responsibility or the added stress of the fact that finances aren't as they were supposed to be. People have lost out on their bonuses. People have lost their jobs. There's also then the COVID itself that's actually still in around, even though we are, we've lessened in terms of stages. We are still very much at risk of the COVID, and simple things like giving your family member a hug or a kiss or a touch, and then there's that added fear of what if, especially if it's an elderly person, there's that fear of infecting your family member with COVID or especially if they're older, and sitting with that guilt and this sense of anxiety where it takes away from the festive cheer.
Mm-hmm. So you speak about guilt and also that sense of anxiety that's there. And then, of course, you have the elderly in the family. And for us in South Africa, sometimes when it comes to the festive season, you go back home. However, though, this time around, things could be quite different because different things are expected of people to make sure that they adhere to the protocols of COVID-19.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult because, COVID has not only changed the way we respond to, our environment, but to each other. And it's this time of year where, physical touch or just seeing a family member that you haven't seen, or even a family member that might be sickly, not even due to COVID, because it's not just COVID that we need to worry about. And then there's that guilt of, okay, what if they're sick and then I add on, something else? Or what if I come and I bring COVID? So, then, it goes back to the main, the topic that we're talking about, isolation. Those who are so used to isolating themselves are even further isolated now because of the COVID and the way things are happening. And also the fear of spreading COVID, especially if you're in a high risk zone or if you have come in contact, or there's just that general fear, whether because you never really know if you're touching somewhere where someone could have been. So I think the fear intensifies the anxiety. I think also the lack of I can say physical presence of people intensifies the depression and therefore also intensifies the risks, or one risks to suicide. And it's a very difficult time for some people to be experiencing.
You speak about suicide, and the thing that comes to mind is the survivor's guilt. Those who survive and somebody else may have committed suicide. And I want to juxtapose that to COVID-19, that I may have been infected with COVID-19 and I have recovered successfully. However, though I know a family member, a friend, or a colleague perhaps who hasn't survived, what happens during that time?
Well, I mean, it's there two things could happen. Is sometimes when you survive, you actually suffer from more trauma than if you didn't, because there's that thought in the background, I could have died. Especially those, I've had clients explain to me what it's like being in a COVID ward, where, or even not, let's say you're in hospital for something completely different. Let's say you broke your ankle or something happened, and you enter into the hospital, but your family can't see you. And that stress of not knowing either what happened or what's going to happen next. And even when you're out of the hospital, there's that sense of, I could have died, and I've experienced loss. It's like loss on top of loss. And it's quite stressful, and it does lead to, one feeling depressed, and, the risk for suicide as well.
What are some of your clients then telling you about this period for them, especially those who may have come in contact with somebody who is COVID-19 positive or may have succumbed as well?
I think fear is the biggest one. Fear and just knowing how close you could have been to death. And not only that, but experiencing loss, funerals, and also fear around funerals, spreading extra COVID and infecting someone else. So there's just this sense of uncertainty where each time, as South African citizens, we're trying to put our feet on the ground, whether it's going from each stage, to also then still having to wear masks, where there's that added fear. There's this intensity in the air of, at any moment it could be you, or if it was your sibling or your relative. Now it's a matter of, how do I move on, but also still prepare for not getting it, or making sure my children don't get it. So it's a very anxiety-provoking thing that we have to deal with, especially during the festive, where it's the time of year where people do tend to relax and spend time with the family. There's also, the people who are thinking about their school children. There's their children and school. Things like, what they've missed out on, or when they're meeting with family, the question of the social clock. What have you done this year? What have you achieved? When are you getting married? For those who had to postpone their weddings. So there's a deep sense of loss and fear that is in the air when it comes to patients, and I assume a lot of South Africans are experiencing, and it does really contribute to certain aspects of mental health.
Yep. Okay, so remember that you can be part of this conversation by going on to our social media pages using the hashtag SABC Unfiltered. That is hashtag SABC Unfiltered. Tell us about how you've experienced the couple of days of the festive season so far, and how it had an impact on the festivities around your family unit. But when we come back, we're going to have a conversation about how do you uplift the mood in the family during this difficult time.